It's a very well attested fact that Dickens adored the theatre in a pretty unqualified kind of a way, despite his occasional animadversions against this performer or that performer or this writer or that writer. Basically, he was in love with the whole business. And of no aspect of the theatre stirred him, thrilled him, excited him, and even moved him, whether to laughter or to tears, more than the popular theatre, the theatre of spectacle, of entertainment, of comedy, of pantomime. In fact, pantomime in its early and nascent form around this time had been defined more or less by the great clown Joey Grimaldi. And Dickens, of course, hugely admired Grimaldi, whom he'd seen as a very little boy. But the idea of pantomime had obviously held a very important place in his mind. So that when in March of 1837, just a couple of months after he'd started editing Bentley's Miscellany, he found himself in need of a piece, something to fill space, basically. He chose to write about pantomime, as people still do today, around Christmas time when they're in short of a topic for a nice little piece. But it seems, actually, though, that this piece, this little occasional piece, brought out something much deeper in Dickens's mind. And it tells us, I think, probably a great deal about his whole approach to writing, to art, and maybe, indeed, to life. Remarkable piece, The Pantomime of Life. Before we plunge headlong into this paper, let us at once confess to a fondness for pantomimes, to a gentle sympathy with clowns and pantaloons, to an unqualified admiration of harlequins and columbines, to a chaste delight in every action of their brief existence, varied and many-coloured as those actions are, and inconsistent though they occasionally be, with those rigid and formal rules of propriety which regulate the proceedings of meaner and less comprehensive minds. We revel in pantomimes, not because they dazzle one's eyes with tinsel and gold leaf, not because they present to us once again the well-beloved chalked faces and goggle eyes of our childhood, not even because, like Christmas Day and Twelfth Night and Shrove Tuesday and one's own birthday, they come to us but once a year. Our attachment is founded on a graver and a very different reason. A pantomime is, to us, a mirror of life. Nay, more. We maintain that it is so to audiences generally, although they are not aware of it, and that this very circumstance is the secret cause of their amusement and delight. Let us take a slight example. The scene is a street. An elderly gentleman with a large face and strongly marked features appears. His countenance beams with a sunny smile, and a perpetual dimple is on his broad red cheek. He is evidently an opulent elderly gentleman, comfortable in circumstances and well-to-do in the world. He is not unmindful of the adornment of his person, for he is richly, not to say grandly, dressed, and that he indulges to a reasonable extent in the pleasures of the table may be inferred from the joyous and oily manner in which he rubs his stomach, by way of informing the audience that he is going home to dinner. In the fullness of his heart, in the fancied security of wealth, in the possession and enjoyment of all the good things in life, the elderly gentleman suddenly loses his footing and stumbles. How the audience roar! He is set upon by a noisy and officious crowd who buffet and cuff him unmercifully. They scream with delight. Every time the elderly gentleman struggles to get up, his relentless persecutors knock him down again. The spectators are convulsed with merriment. And when at last the elderly gentleman does get up and staggers away, despoiled of hat, wig, and clothing, himself battered to pieces and his watch and money gone, they are exhausted with laughter and express their merriment and admiration in rounds of applause. It is like life. Change the scene to any real street, to the stock exchange or the city bankers. the merchant's counting house, or even the tradesman's shop. See any one of these men fall, the more suddenly and the nearer the zenith of his pride and riches, the better. What a wild hallo is raised over his prostrate carcass by the shouting mob. How they whoop and yell as he lies humbled beneath them. Mark how eagerly they set upon him when he is down, and how they mock and deride him as he slinks away. Why, it is the pantomime to the very letter. Of all the pantomime dramatis personae, we consider the pantaloon the most worthless and debauched. Independent of the dislike one naturally feels at seeing a gentleman of his years engaged in pursuits highly unbecoming his gravity and time of life, we cannot conceal from ourselves the fact that he is a treacherous, worldly-minded old villain, constantly enticing his younger companion, the clown, into acts of fraud or petty larceny, and generally standing aside to watch the result of his enterprise. If it be so successful, he never forgets to return for his share of the spoil. But if it turn out a failure, he generally retires with remarkable caution and expedition, and keeps carefully aloof until the affair has blown over. His amorous propensities, too, are eminently disagreeable, and his mode of addressing ladies in the open street at noonday is downright improper, being usually neither more nor less than a perceptible tickling of the aforesaid ladies in the waist, after committing which he starts back, manifestly ashamed, as well he might be, of his own indecorum and temerity, continuing, nevertheless, to ogle and beckon to them from a distance in a very unpleasant and immoral manner. Is there any man who cannot count a dozen pantaloons in his own social circle? Is there any man who has not seen them swarming at the west end of the town on a sunshiny day, or a summer's evening, going through the last-named pantomimic feats with as much liquorish energy and as total an absence of reserve as if they were on the very stage itself? We can tell upon our fingers a dozen pantaloons of our acquaintance at this moment, capital pantaloons who have been performing all kinds of strange freaks to the great amusement of their friends and acquaintance for years past, and who to this day are making such comical and ineffectual attempts to be young and dissolute that all beholders are like to die with laughter. All people who have been behind the scenes, and most people who have been before them, know that in the representation of a pantomime, a good many men are sent upon the stage for the express purpose of being cheated or knocked down, or both. Now, down to a moment ago, we had never been able to understand for what possible purpose a great number of odd, lazy, large-headed men, whom one is in the habit of meeting here and there and everywhere, could ever have been created. We see it all now. They are the supernumeraries in the pantomime of life. The men who have been thrust into it with no other view than to be constantly tumbling over each other and running their heads against all sorts of strange things. We sat opposite to one of these men at a supper table only last week. Now we think of it, he was exactly like the gentleman with the pasteboard heads and faces, who do the corresponding business in the theatrical pantomimes. There was the same broad, stolid simper, the same dull, leaden eye, the same unmeaning, vacant stare. And whatever was said, or whatever was done, he always came in at precisely the wrong place, or jostled against something that he had not the slightest business with. We looked at the man across the table again and again, and could not satisfy ourselves what race of beings to class him with. How very odd that this never occurred to us before. We will frankly own that we have been much troubled with the harlequin. We see harlequins of so many kinds in the real living pantomime that we hardly know which to select as the proper fellow of him of the theatres. At one time we were disposed to think that the harlequin was neither more nor less than a young man of family and independent property, who had run away with an opera dancer and was fooling his life and his means away in light and trivial amusements. On reflection, however, we remembered that harlequins are occasionally guilty of witty and even clever acts, and we're rather disposed to acquit our young men of family and independent property, generally speaking, of any such misdemeanours. On a more mature consideration of the subject, we've arrived at the conclusion that the harlequins of life are just ordinary men, to be found in no particular walk or degree, on whom a certain station or particular conjunction of circumstances confers the magic wand. And this brings us to a few words on the pantomime of public and political life, which we shall say at once and then conclude, merely premising in this place that we decline any reference whatever to the Columbine, being in no wise satisfied of the nature of her connection with her party-coloured lover, and not feeling by any means clear that we should be justified in introducing her to the virtuous and respectable ladies who peruse our lucubrations. We take it that the commencement of a session of Parliament is neither more nor less than the drawing up of the curtain for a grand comic performance. Pantomime at that. And that His Majesty's most gracious speech on the opening thereof may be not inaptly compared to the clown's opening speech of "Here we are! My lords and gentlemen, here we are," appears to our mind at least to be a very good abstract of the point and meaning of the propitiatory address of the ministry, when we remember how frequently this speech is made immediately after the change to the parallel is quite perfect and still more singular. Perhaps the cast of our political pantomime never was richer than at this day. We're particularly strong in clowns. At no former time, we should say, have we had such an astonishing tumblers or performers so ready to go through the whole of their feats for the amusement of an admiring throng. Their extreme readiness to exhibit, indeed, has given rise to some ill-natured reflections, it having been objected that by exhibiting gratuitously through the country when the theatre is closed, they reduce themselves to the level of mountebanks, and thereby tend to degrade the respectability of the profession. Certainly Grimaldi never did this sort of thing, and though Brown, King, and Gibson have gone to the Surrey in vacation time, and Mr. C.J. Smith has ruralised at Sadler's Wells, we find no theatrical precedent for a general tumbling through the country, except in the gentleman, name unknown, who threw Somersets on behalf of the late Mr. Richardson, and who is no authority either, because he had never been on the regular boards. But laying aside this question, which after all is a mere matter of taste, we may reflect with pride and gratification of heart on the proficiency of our clowns as exhibited in the season. Night after night will they twist and tumble about until 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the morning, playing the strangest antics and giving each other the funniest slaps on the face that can possibly be imagined without evincing the smallest problems of fatigue. The strange noises, the confusion, the shouting and roaring amid which all this is done, too, would put to shame the most turbulent sixpenny gallery that ever yelled through a boxing night. It is especially curious to behold one of these clowns compelled to go through the most surprising contortions by the irresistible influence of the wand of office, which his leader or harlequin holds above his head. Acted upon by this wonderful charm, he will become perfectly motionless, moving neither hand, foot, nor finger, and will even lose the faculty of speech at an instant's notice. Or, on the other hand, he will become all life and animation, if required, pouring forth a torrent of words without sense or meaning, throwing himself into the wildest and most fantastic contortions, and even grovelling on the earth and licking up the dust. These exhibitions are more curious than pleasing, and indeed they are rather disgusting than otherwise, except to the admirers of such things with whom we confess to have no fellow feeling. Strange tricks, very strange tricks, are also performed by the harlequin, who holds for the time being the magic wand which we have just mentioned. The mere waving it before a man's eyes will dispossess his brains of all the notions previously stored there, and fill it with an entirely new set of ideas. One gentle tap on the back will alter the colour of a man's coat completely. And there are some expert performers who, having this wand held first on one side and then on the other, will change from side to side, turning their coats at every evolution with so much rapidity and dexterity that the quickest eye can scarcely detect their motions. Occasionally, the genius who confers the wand wrests it from the hand of the temporary possessor and consigns it to some new performer, on which occasions all the characters change sides, and then the race and the hard knocks begin anew. We might have extended this chapter to a much greater length. We might have carried the comparison into the liberal professions. We might have shown, as was in fact our original purpose, that each is in itself a little pantomime with scenes and characters of its own, complete. But as we fear we have been quite lengthy enough already, we shall leave this chapter just where it is. A gentleman not altogether unknown as a dramatic poet wrote this a year or two ago: "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." And we, tracking out his footsteps at the scarcely worth mentioning little distance of a few millions of leagues behind, venture to add, by way of new reading, that he meant a pantomime, and that we are all actors in the pantomime of life.